Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we're going to spend a whole program talking about a cat. Not really a cat, a book, a wonderful, happy, interesting book about a cat. It is called Lost Cat. Hold on for the subtitle. We used to call this a reading line years ago. A true story of love, desperation, and GPS technology. Written by Caroline Paul. Drawings by Wendy McNaughton. Publisher is Bloomsbury. Welcome.
I'm so happy to be here, Jim.
I'm glad you could make it. This is your third book, it says here. Your first book was East Wind Rain, a historical novel. And the second book was Fighting Fire, a memoir. And now you're moving up subject-wise. Talk about a cat. But this is the kind of book that people would hear about or see in a bookstore and say, I'm not into cats, so I'm not going to do anything with this book. However, Publishers Weekly points out it is hilarious and moving. Even non-cat lovers, what few people there are out there who are non-cat lovers, will find this an engaging read, charmingly illustrated by Caroline Paul's partner, Wendy McNaughton, as Paul easily makes her strong emotions for her pets accessible and universal. That's important to note that there are two cats in this story. One of them, name is Tibby, and the other one's name is Fibby.
Tibia and fibula
Yes.
is for long,
Yeah.
but yeah.
And according to the illustrations in the book, they look pretty much alike, I think. One's bigger than the other. And they're twins?
They're twins. We got them from the pound. I got them from the pound 13 years before this story begins. And they were about a couple months old.
And then there's a great irony in your story, in the backstory to this book, because you were flying around in an experimental plane, and did you crash?
I did, rather humiliatingly, if that is a good adverb. I crashed my experimental plane in pretty rough weather. Yeah.
And injured your tibia and your fibula.
Yeah.
How fitting.
I know.
It's as though you were planning this book, and you offered up your body to make it, an interesting story.
I promise you that I would have named my cat's Sprained Wrist if I could have.
Good point. Oh, and all this had the result, if you will, of creating a very difficult patient, namely you, but the timing of this was terrible because you were in the first stages of a new relationship, one that you write about with great enthusiasm, and it was world tilting, rainbow laden, all that kind of stuff, and you now punctuate it with fibula, tibula, drugs, and all like that.
Yeah, I begin the book with my plane crash. In fact, I think the first sentence is, one day I was in a plane crash.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty good way to start a book. It's not the way I would have wanted to. I really was choosing to live my life, but it's what happened. And yes, after an injury, I think for people who've been there, it can be really traumatic on a lot of levels because you not only are you immobile, but you're taking a lot of painkillers. And so I was in a pretty bad way. I was falling into a pretty deep depression.
Yeah, and you described that very nicely without being maudlin about it. And you were in serious bad shape.
I was, and I think it's sort of at those times where you cling to the things you know. And, of course, two of the things I knew were my two cats who had been with me. They were the longest relationship of my adult life.
12 years, I think.
13, yep.
Yeah.
So I sort of had this absurd need. As I say in the book, they represented that there had been life before the injury and that there would be a normal, happy life after the injury.
Yeah. Now, there's another key person in this work, and that would be Wendy McNaughton. Now, Wendy, I assume, has a good reason for not being here. Otherwise, we would send her a bill. But she's in New York, I think you said, and she is. Tell us about her work. I'm very impressed with it. I mean, and as I said to you before we went on, I have the feeling that your writing and her illustrations just go together beautifully.
Yeah, I'd never collaborated before on a book, so a writer-illustrator relationship was sort of new to me, but I thought I knew how it went. You know, you wrote the whole thing, and then you gave them the book, and then they would illustrate it. But our writer-illustrator relationship is a little different because we're in a relationship. Mm-hmm. So we had to learn how to collaborate, and for both of us, it was the first time we wrote a book. But she's the one I was totally head over heels for, and then crashed my plane and I went from being my most perfect self to my most imperfect self in a matter of seconds.
Yeah. Now, the other thing is that, and I just want to mention this because I think it's factually important, at the beginning of all this, Wendy was not a cat person.
No, she wasn't. She was pretending to be a cat person, as one does when you're trying to impress the person that you're newly with.
Okay.
At the beginning of the book, she was a Caroline person, as she likes to say.
Fine.
Lucky for me.
Enough of the Lost Cat backstory. Let's get to the star, to Lost Cat. We're going to do that when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Our book today is Lost Cat, a true story of love, desperation, and GPS technology. And the author, Caroline Paul, is with us. The illustrator, Wendy McNaughton, is busy someplace else. The book is still published by Bloomsbury. That hasn't changed. Nancy Bent, writing in Booklist, said this about the book: "This addictive read, marvelously illustrated by Wendy's ink and wash drawings, will captivate all pet lovers." I want you to tell her that when you talk to her tonight in New York, that we got that in. We talked about her marvelously illustrated drawings. So good for Wendy. But let's get back to the main character. It's we need to be properly introduced to Tibby, and a 13-year-old Tabby at the time, who shows a kind of inordinate love after the accident. Lots of love you're throwing at him after the accident. And then all of a sudden, no reason at all, he disappears. Mm-hmm. He disappears. Tell us how you felt at that point.
Well, I was devastated. I was really relying on my cats in my very addled state. And sort of my world had turned upside down already. And then he disappeared, and it sort of flipped again. And, of course, I was immobile, so it was hard for me to actually look for him. But my friends rallied, and they did everything. And weeks passed, and I was, no sign of Tibby. And then after a month, I realized that I was going to have to face it, that, he was just too shy to survive in the city, and that he had to be dead.
And yet you felt compelled, as any good cat owner would, to do everything you could to try and find him.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was outside on my porch every night calling for him, and my neighbors hated me.
And you put up the usual flyers all around the neighborhood, lampposts outside coffee shops and all that kind of stuff, I suppose. But you've done some extraordinary things to try and find this cat. One is you consulted with a psyche who says that Tibby is safe and not injured. A psychic? There is such a thing?
Yeah. Actually, I mean, I tried a lot of things in this book, and the psychic seemed to be one of the most sane. She was very reassuring, and I figured if she could speak to the other world, then have her go at it.
And you felt the same about God, Allah, Buddha, and something called the great cosmic vibrant energy. I mean, this is all signs of what's mentioned in the title, Desperation.
Yeah.
I guess. I mean, that's the way I saw it. So the other thing is that, and I think this is very important to the story, a woman named Wendy walks the streets looking for that cat.
Yep, she was really good she still wasn't a cat person, but she saw my my extreme angst and really pitched in. But of course the story doesn't really, this is all sort of a prelude to the real story.
Oh yeah, we'll get to that in a while. One of the things you also did was visit cat shelters or animal shelters. And there's a fantastic illustration of the quintessential animal shelter person, volunteer, in her uniform, and all the things that are attached to this person, including a walkie-talkie. She has to wear dark, stain-resistant pants. She has a couple of toys on her hands, and a wonderful, touching picture of the kind of people that help.
Well, when I was better, I would sort of I'd crutch my way to the pound and weep at the stairs and then go up, and the one volunteer would take me around, and they really are pretty amazing people because they help so many animals and all lost, abandoned, and hurt, kind of the way I was a little bit, and they took care of me too. In fact, I have to say that this whole book, the title is Lost Cat, but really the title should be Lost Human.
Being?
Well, I think this is a book about sort of our love for animals and how they sort of help us in our darkest times. And this was one of my darkest times.
After all the things you did, 5 weeks later, Tibby returns.
Yes, he returned.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah.
This is so cat-like, though. I mean, cats do not live giving explanations. They just do.
Right.
So 5 weeks later, you're out of your mind, and cat walks back.
He sauntered in, and he looked fine. In fact, he was fat.
He was a half-pound heavier, according to the vet. His coat was silky, and he had a kind of a spring in his step. And this made you angry in a way.
Well, when your cat returns, you're happy, but, after a while, those emotions subside a little, and you start to feel a little betrayed. I mean, he did leave suddenly in my hour of need. And so I felt like any woman would when their man suddenly has a secret life.
And he comes back and assumes his, quote, rightful, unquote, position in the household.
Yes.
Oh, just like a man.
Yeah.
Just like a man. Okay. All right, Tibby's story now turns into Operation Chasing Tibby and finding the den of iniquity. Oh, we'll find out about these things when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Caroline Paul is with us today to talk about her new book, Lost Cat, the true story of love, desperation, and GPS technology. And the drawings in the book are by Wendy McNaughton. The publisher is Bloomsbury. And Mary Roach, who is the best-selling author of Packing for Mars and Stiff. What an interesting... Is that one book or two? It's got to be two.
Two, and she just has a book out. She has a book out now called Gulp.
Ah, she's the one. Okay, yeah.
It's very funny. We were honored that
about
she
the alimentary canal.
Yeah.
Is it not? Yes. Well, at any rate, this woman says, Mary Roach does, you may say that love is not a word for feelings between people and books. I say, I love this book. I felt giddy when I read it. I smiled constantly and made snorty, crack-up noises, the kind that make people around you go, what? Then I'd get choked up, and then I'd be giddy again, and all the way through. I didn't want it ever to end. I think we can all agree that's love. Congratulations. That's one of the best encomiums we've ever read here.
Yeah, she was very generous.
I hate to be a stickler, but can you please tell me what a snorty, what is that thing? Snorty crack-up noises?
You've never laughed so hard that you snort through your nose by accident?
Oh, no, I don't do that.
Okay.
I don't do that. No, not at all. Not at all. Now, we come to the point in the story and in the book that when I realized what was going on, I said to myself, this woman's crazy. She's got the cat back. Wendy has become a cat person, pretty much, I think. And she's not satisfied. This woman, you initiate a second search. For what?
Well, I wanted to find out where he was going because I think at the time, you're not the first to call me nuts, Jim, by the way.
Oh, well.
But
I mean,
I think I was definitely more nuts because of the situation I was in. It was very disorienting to be sort of in your house for a month.
Because of the injuries.
Yeah, I mean, my injury was very bad, and I'd had a head injury as well, and I'd had an arm situation, and my leg was shattered. And so it's fair to say that I was nuts then, too.
Well, to be honest about it, when someone is in a traumatic situation physically, they're looking for something to hold on to.
Right.
And in that situation, very often the answer to what do you want to hold on to is your pet.
Well, it was also more than that. You know, I had described him in the book as being sort of that boy at school with the Coke bottle glasses who always gets beat up. And he was that, I thought. He was a shy and skittish cat. And how could he have gotten fat and happy out in the wild? My version of Tibby was that he couldn't survive out there, that he really only could survive with my love and under my roof. And so when he came back, I had to sort of redo my image of him. And I was already very disoriented. And I think the shock of realizing that he wasn't the cat I thought he was, and this is kind of classic for any of us with the people that we love. If they aren't who we thought they were, it's very disorienting. And you sort of want to prove that that's not true. So I thought if I put a GPS on Tibby and followed him to wherever he went, I would somehow get a clear picture of who he was. And so I told Wendy, we have to follow Tibby.
There's a very funny scene in the book of you're going to a local electronics store, I would guess you would call it, looking for a GPS system.
Well, it's a spy store, and we have one in the city, and it's an amazing store, and I urge everybody who's loves gadgets to go because it's amazing. And I love gadgets, but that day I was on a mission, and I was only there to find something that would follow Tibby. So, something that could follow a cat when I was on painkillers and crutches.
And
so,
the clerk
of course,
was very, very helpful, finally saying, honey, go online.
Right.
And you went online and you found a gentleman who created a GPS system to be worn by cats or dogs.
Cats only. Well, see, it was
cats only.
At the time, it was 2009, and there was no GPS small enough for a cat.
Mm-hmm.
Now there are. I'd like to say that I was ahead of the technological curve, like cat ladies tend to be. We're not given enough credit for that. But at the time in 2009, there was nothing. Nothing at if the international spies don't have it, which they didn't, at the spy store, then it's going to be hard to find. And this guy made one in his garage for cats, and I ordered it, and it arrived, and we put it on Tibby.
And that's one of the ways that you actually found Kitty. Again, thanks to Wendy. Because a lot of things were coming in through the GPS, which you would be like me, didn't have the foggiest notion what they meant.
Well,
right?
neither of us did, actually. I mean, we thought that, first of all, you think your cat just sleeps. And studies say your cat really sleeps about 18 hours a day. So when I downloaded the first GPS map onto my computer, I really thought what I was going to find was a straight line from my house to the perp or the feral cat colony.
Yeah.
Or the drain pipe that he was hanging out in.
Yes.
Because, by the way, the reason I had a hunch that he was still going back is because he wasn't eating at home.
Right.
Clearly. So he was clearly going back to that den of iniquity. So when I downloaded the GPS, I was like, we're going to figure this out. It's easy. And the first map comes in, and as I say in the book, it looks like a kid has drawn on a satellite map with a crayon after eating a box of Twinkies.
Telling nothing.
Yes, it was. You couldn't make head or tails of the map. So we did another one, hoping, and another one, and each map came in gobbledygook, and we did 22 of them in all.
Oh. Again, it's Wendy who makes the final.
You love Wendy. You love
Wendy.
Wendy.
I'm just trying to give her credit because she's not here.
Right.
You wouldn't let her come in. You sent her off to New York. And I'm just
she was
trying to be fair.
She was great. I mean, she was the sane one in the family.
She was the what?
The sane one in the family.
Well,
it wasn't hard. Of course, the bar was pretty low, but
you
still.
had all kinds of reasons for not being sane.
Right.
And out of it, though, has come a truly wonderful book, a book that the woman who says nice things on the back is correct. As Mary Roach says, this is a book to love. The title is Lost Cat, a true story of love, desperation, and GPS technology. Written by Caroline Paul, illustrated by Wendy McNaughton. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.